Once upon a time, in a kingdom called Umachi, there lived a prince called Ikenga. Ikenga is a very handsome young gentleman whose gracious mind and heart has always been for the people and only for his people. He was loved and considered to be a strong, agile, and masculine prince. The young ladies in the village always make it a prayer point to be his chosen wife. But one striking thing about Prince Ikenga was that he never had eyes for any of the girls. Until one day, the prince falls in love with a maid called Asa. Asa is a very beautiful and young maid that served in the palace. Her face glows all the time with brightness and beauty. Yes, it was love at first sight Prince Ikenga had for Asa. The first day he saw her singing and dancing while cleaning his bedroom was a great sight to behold. He was so struck with dumbness that his heartbeat drummed severally all night. The following morning, he had professed his love to Asa, and he had also found out that she had also secretly been in love with him. When everyone found out about their relationship, the whole village was in chaos. The king and the queen despised Asa so much because each time they tried to ridicule her, Prince Ikenga always had her back and defended her. The whole villagers despised her but couldn't do anything about it because the prince was in love with her. Asa became the center of hatred in the midst of the young maidens in Omachi. Anywhere she went to, she was stared at enviously. The prince Ikenga took their relationship to the next level by going ahead to propose marriage to her. The whole village was left in fury and aggression. They tried to stop the marriage, but Ikenga was so bent on marrying Asa. Some even concluded that she used charm on the prince. That is why the prince is so focused on her and so bent on marrying her. The king and the queen's hatred for Asa increased, but finally, the couples in love got married against everyone's wish. On the day of their marriage, the queen refused to attend the marriage ceremony despite the pleas from the king and the elders. After their marriage, one fateful day, Asa cooked a delicious meal for her husband Ikenga. She set the food on the table and went ahead to call on Ikenga. Prince Ikenga came out looking all happy and blooming with smiles because his queen had cooked for him. Asa stroked his hair while he uncovered the plates of pounded yam and egusi soup to eat. As he washed his hands, the queen walked past them, looked at them and hissed for no reason. Prince Ikenga shook his head and started eating his food happily. After he was done eating, he smiled happily and Asa packed the plates. She came back to the parlor and saw him sitting down watching some drama on the TV. She smiled and sat down with him. Few minutes later, Prince Ikenga started feeling uncomfortable in his stomach. Asa turned to him and asked if he was okay, and he nodded, signifying a yes. Few minutes later, he started screaming and holding his stomach. Ah! Ah, my stomach! Asa immediately jumped up, looking all scared. Ikenga, what is wrong with you? Why are you like this? Talk to me, she shouted as Ikenga fell on the ground and started vomiting blood. Oh my God! Somebody help me! My queen! My king! She shouted, already in tears as she tried to wake Ikenga up, but he wasn't responding. At that point, the queen and the king, likewise every other person in the palace, ran to the scene. Blood of Jesus! Ikenga! What happened to my son? The queen asked, running towards where Ikenga had laid lifelessly on the floor. I don't know, Asa cried, trying to shake the lifeless Ikenga who was lying on the floor to wake up. Call the royal ambulance immediately, the king ordered. Within seconds, an ambulance arrived at the palace. Ikenga was hurriedly carried by the palace bodyguards into the ambulance. While the king, the queen, Asa, and others followed, crying, the ambulance sped out of the palace, heading straight to the hospital. The prince was rushed into the operating ward, where the doctors began their treatment. A few hours later, the doctor walked into the once bright royal palace, now gloomy and sad, reeking of total despair. The atmosphere was thick with invisible smoke of sorrow. No one needed to be told that something abominable had occurred. The doctor entered, and almost everyone jumped to their feet, eager to hear what he had to say. "Doctor, what is wrong with my son?" the queen asked, her face filled with worry and distress. Asa, whose face had been covered with tears all this while, immediately wiped her tears and stood up to meet the doctor as well. "Doctor, please, how is my husband?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor sat down, a grave expression on his face. He cleared his throat and looked at their faces. He shook his head sadly. The queen felt as if she might run mad at that point. "Doctor, talk to me. What is wrong with my son, please?" she begged. "I am afraid to say this, but the prince was poisoned," the doctor said. Everyone shouted in shock. "We found some poisonous substance in his food," he continued, and the room erupted in exclamation of "Eh?" and "Abomination! Arrow!" The queen screamed and cried. Suddenly, she turned to Asa, who was also in shock and crying. "It is you. Yes, it is you. You fed him food last. My son hasn't eaten anything other than your food since morning." "Ha! So you poisoned my son's food," she accused, landing a hot slap on Asa's face before she could respond. "Ah, my queen, I would never do such a thing," she cried. "You dare open your stinking mouth to lie to me? Who the hell do you think you are? Eh? So you finally succeeded. You finally succeeded in carrying out your plans. Eh, Asa? Eh? Chineke o," the queen cried, while Asa shook her head in defense. "No, my queen, I didn't do it. I would never do it. I would never poison Ikenga, my husband," she sobbed. "You liar. You better pray that nothing happens to my son. If not, Asa, you will have yourself to blame." The queen shouted and walked out of the room. The king looked at her disgustedly and walked out as well. Everyone else followed, including the maids, the guards, the Prince Ikenga's siblings, Princess Ada, Princess Ola, and Prince Ozo. "I've never liked you ever since you became the crown princess of Umachi, but I never knew that you were this disgusting. Just like Mom said, you better pray that nothing happens to my brother. If not," Princess Ada said angrily before walking out. Prince Uzo and Princess Ola did not say anything. They only gave her stern looks before leaving. Asa cried endlessly. She never imagined a day like this would come, where she would solemnly be accused of something she never had a hand in. Every day, she prayed fervently for Ikenga's recovery, pleading to God, the gods of Umachi, and every deity she could think of. Her pain was unbearable. She wanted everything to go back to normal. She wished it was all a bad dream and that she would wake up soon. But things only got worse when the royal doctor visited the palace. The palace was steeped in sadness and gloom. No one smiled, and conversations were rare. Everyone prayed privately for Ikenga's safety, except for the one person harboring ill will. The doctor walked into the palace, finding everyone already seated in the parlor, waiting for him. As he entered, his unusual demeanor and appearance caused everyone's heart to stop momentarily. "Doctor, You said you wanted to tell us something. Please, what is it? We are all ears. The queen urged him. The doctor slowly shook his head. At that point, everyone's heart immediately stopped beating. Doctor, please talk to us. What is the matter? What is wrong with Ike? What is wrong with my husband? Asa stood up, tears already forming in her eyes. The doctor sighed badly. He didn't know how to break the news. Doctor, the queen ran up to him, clutching his shirt. Please don't tell me it's what I'm thinking, she pleaded. I'm sorry, my queen. The doctor shook his head again, trying to fight back tears. The prince is no more, he finally said. Everyone shouted in shock. Some placed their hands on their heads. Others exclaimed, Alo, abomination, to fear Akwa, while turning their hands over their heads and spitting on the ground. Asa couldn't believe what she had just heard. She fell on the floor in tears. The queen, upon hearing the doctor's words, was so shocked that she immediately had a heart attack and collapsed. My queen, everyone shouted, running towards her. The people of Umuachi never expected something like this would ever befall them. Within a blink of an eye, the crown prince of Umuachi kingdom was gone. It was something like a dream to some folks, and news had already spread round the whole village like a wildfire. The queen, who had succumbed on the floor, slowly opened her eyes weakly. She was surrounded by different individuals as she was laid on the royal bed. My queen, how are you feeling? The king asked her, but she just looked at the doctor again and again and began to cry. Doctor, give me back my son. I beg you in the name of God. Where is my son? She cried, stood up and looked at Asa. The next thing, she began slapping and hitting her. Provide my son for me. You killed him. You killed my son. You daughter of a nobody. You killed my son. I will make sure you rot in misery for the rest of your life, she cried, while others tried to hold her from doing worse than that. Asa continued crying on the floor. Her eyes were so red that she didn't know where to start from to defend herself. She felt all alone. What sort of explanation would she give that would sound appeasing to the ears when all accusations were pointing towards her? She couldn't step her foot out of the palace. Her name was directly on the lips of all the villagers of Umuachi kingdom. Every woman detested her. Every lady and every elder were disgusted by her appearance. No one wanted to have anything to do with her. One day, the king called a meeting in the palace where all the elders were present. The queen and Asa, who was kneeling in the middle. You have done a very abominable act, and you must be punished for that, the king said angrily, pointing at the crying Asa. But my king, I did not kill my husband. I would never do something like that, Asa wept. An elder slowly cleared his throat and spoke. My king, may you live long, he said. The king responded, I know that it is a very abominable act that has been committed in our kingdom, and the culprit must be punished. But just like the girl said, she did not kill the prince. We did not literally know who killed Prince. I hope that drastic actions would not be taken when things have not yet been investigated and we end up regretting it later. I wish that we look further into this murder before doing anything, he said, and the queen stood up at that point. What other evidence and investigation do we need when it is so clear here that Asa is the culprit? She poisoned my son with her food. That is what the doctor said. She angrily sat down. Another elder cleared his throat and spoke. I think, Your Majesty, I would agree with what the queen just said. The queen had a point. Prince Ikenga was killed by food poisoning, as said by the doctor, and the only food he ate that day was the food that was prepared by his wife here, Asa. So I don't think we need any other investigation for this, he said, and another elder immediately shouted at him, "Shut up there! Shut up there, chief! Why do you talk like a child? This is a very serious matter we are talking about here. This is the death of the Prince of Umuachi that we are talking about here, and not just anybody else's death. That is why the real culprit must be found and punished for his death. To avenge his death, let us not do something that will attract the anger of the gods or of our land, Bikonu," he said, and they all started arguing and raining insults on each other. "You are the child here. You are very stupid for calling me that." "No, you are the stupid one." The king got annoyed and hit his hand angrily on his chair. "Enough," he said, and they all stopped bantering. "Enough of all this rubbish. I am the king and I will make the final say. Asa," he calls and turns to Asa, "you are going to stand before the gods of our land and make a swear that you did not have a hand in the death of the prince in 3 weeks. And before the 3 weeks, you will be treated and working as a maid that you were already in this palace before my son married you. But that does not mean that you will not follow the customs and traditions of our land for widows. I have said my words," he said, and that was how the meeting ended. Asa sat down on the floor and cried really hard. She wished Ikenga, the love of her life, never died. She wished she could avenge his death and bring out the culprit from wherever he or she was hiding. At that point, Princess Ada walked into the sitting room and saw her that way. She has always been the calmest of all the siblings and the eldest child. She bent down at Asa and wiped her tears. "It's okay, dear. I know you did not kill my brother Ikenga. I know that you are innocent at the point." Asa raised her head up to look at her in surprise. That was the first time since Prince Ikenga died that someone would be telling her those words. The words she had yearned for severally but found none. She immediately started crying. "Thank you so much, my princess. Thank you so much. I never knew that you would believe me," she said, and Princess Ada smiled and hugged her, soothing her to stop crying. The following morning, Adugo was woken up with noises coming from outside the palace. There were several women outside, singing and asking Ada to come outside. "Your husband is gone, oh, you sorrowful woman that has nobody now. Come out, so come and do the needful, oh. Come out and face the shame, oh. Come out and let's show you what we are made of, oh." Asa slowly cleaned her eyes and walked out of the palace to go meet them. When she went out, she saw them holding different razors in their hands. At that point, she immediately got scared. The women leaders saw her and they started making mockery of Asa by placing their palm on their mouth and making some mockery noise at her. She was dragged from where she stood to the center. They sat her down on the ground and looked at her scornfully. "So, as per the customs and traditions of our land, we are going to be shaving out this hair of yours that has killed Prince," the woman leader spoke. "I did not kill the prince," Asa defended. "Shut up, who asked you? Of course, culprits will never agree that they are the one until they are shown the other side of life," the women leader said and pushed her to the ground. "Our prince lived for 30 years before he died. So we are going to be using 30 different razors to shave your hair until you go bald," she said, and Asa started crying and begging them to have mercy on her. But none of them paid attention. "Give me the razor," the women leader commanded, and a razor was immediately given to her. Then she began shaving Asa's hair. Asa couldn't stop crying as she saw her precious hair fall from her head, scraped repeatedly with 30 razors. I didn't kill the prince, she kept saying. Shut up, who asked you? One of the women shouted. You think we will fall for your crocodile tears? We already know women like you. And to think that it is our gentle and handsome prince, you think we are going to take it lightly? You lie, another woman said angrily, mocking Asa as she sat on the ground while her hair was cruelly scraped away. My dear women of Omachi Kingdom, make sure that lady lying there receives the best hair scraping ever. Let her feel the pain of how I lost my brother, Prince Uzo said as he walked out and saw the scene. Yes, my prince, they all bowed down. Prince Uzo turned to Asa, who was sitting on the ground. You killed my brother, right? My one and only brother. I will make sure the gods of our land strike you to death soon. He threatened and walked back into the palace with all royalty and majesty, while the women continued their torture on Asa. The following morning, Asa, now reduced to the rank of a maid, woke up as early as possible, joined the other maids, and started cleaning the whole house. She was assigned to clean Prince Uzo's room, so she knocked and heard a coming. She entered, finding Prince Uzo already awake and in the bathroom showering. She immediately started cleaning his room, bending down to dust the dirt from his table. Prince Uzo came out of the bathroom. Good morning, my prince, Asa greeted and continued her task. He only nodded and looked at her. While Asa was cleaning, she felt someone tickle her waist from behind. She immediately turned in shock and looked at him. My prince, what are you trying to do? She asked, stammering. Prince Uzo let out a silly grin. Come on, Asa, don't pretend you don't understand. He winked, licking his lips. Asa shook her head. I'm sorry, my prince, but I do not understand anything you are trying to say, she said. Prince Uzo chuckled, walked closer to her. Asa, you know you are a very beautiful lady. I have always admired you, before and after my brother married you. I always wanted you for myself, to have you on my bed and devour your sweet body. But you chose my brother, and look where it has gotten you, he said. Asa shook her head in disbelief. My prince, I can't believe you are saying these things. I cannot believe these words are coming from your mouth. I am your late brother's wife, in case you've forgotten, Asa shouted. Prince Uzo immediately slapped her hard. And who are you to tell me what to say? Yes, you are my brother's wife, and that makes you my inheritance. Get that into your skull, he shouted. Asa shook in fear. Then he slowly calmed down and started stroking her face endearingly with a naughty smile. If you just agree to my request right now, all your worries will be over. I will talk to my people, marry you, and you'll be free from all these burdens, he said. Asa shook her head. Over my dead body will I do that to Ikem. Ikem was my only husband and will forever be my husband. Even though he is dead, he is the only one I have ever loved. I can never do that to him by marrying his brother. That will hurt his feelings wherever he is, she said. Prince Uzo immediately grabbed her back and she shouted, struggling to breathe. I could kill you right now if I wanted to, but guess what? I won't because I like you, he said, releasing a dirty smile. He pushed her to the bed and tried taking advantage of her. At that moment, Asa kicked him, pushed him off, and ran out of the room, panting and sweating. She wished Ikem never died. She wished her husband was still alive. All these things wouldn't have happened. She ran into her room and fell on the floor, crying hard. At that point, Princess Ola walked into her room and looked at her from head to toe. My friend, will you stand up and make me food? What are you doing here when other maids are in the kitchen making breakfast?" she ordered. Asa immediately stood up and wiped her tears. "But my princess, my work is just to clean and dust," Asa told her. Princess Ola immediately slapped her. "How dare you talk back to me? Who authorized you? My friend, go to the kitchen, make me food. You are here telling me your work is only to clean and dust. What is the meaning of that? What does maid mean?" "Ewu," she cursed. Asa slowly left in tears and went to the kitchen. As she joined the other maids in cooking, she never imagined that a day would come when she would be reduced back to being a maid. When Ikem had proposed to her, she felt so loved and cherished that she never believed she would be pushed back into a maid-like situation. She was so happy and felt so blessed to have Ikem in her life. Who would have believed that she would come back one day to where she had once begun? She wiped her tears and continued cooking. As she cooked, she felt like poking. The smells of the food struck her so badly that she suddenly ran out of the kitchen and into the bathroom. She had been feeling very dizzy and ill these past few days. Her body felt different and she cried endlessly, missing Ike more than ever. She went back to the kitchen and everyone looked at her weirdly. She only wiped her mouth and continued with her task. Days passed and the people of Umachi continued their endless gossip, torture and maltreatment of Asa. Life for Asa in the palace was worse than ever. The only person who stood by her was Princess Ada, who tried to soothe her every time she cried in secret. One day, a loud yell was heard from the king's chamber. Everyone immediately gathered. The king was extremely angry and looked like he could tear someone into pieces at that moment. "Where is my staff of authority?" he shouted, and everyone shook in fear. "I can't find my staff of authority," he yelled. They all looked at him in surprise and fear. "What, Your Majesty? You mean you cannot find your staff of authority?" the queen asked. The king looked like someone who wanted to run mad. "I just said I cannot find it. I cannot find what makes me a king. Which among you stole it? You better bring it out now, or else you already know the wrath of the gods when they are angry. You better bring it out now, or else you will face the consequences." He shouted at the maids, guards, and everyone else, but they all bowed their heads in silence. "My king, I suggest we search everyone's room, bags, and belongings. This is the only way to find it, and the culprit wouldn't have gone far with it," Princess Ada calmly said. The queen immediately concurred. "I think I will agree with what my daughter just said. She's right, my king. Let us do a thorough search of everyone's room and belongings. We might find the staff of authority," the queen said. The king nodded convincingly. "I think you both are right. Guards," he called out, and they all appeared, bowing before him. "Yes, my king. Go and search all the rooms in this palace and bring me my staff of authority. The culprit must be found," he ordered, and the search immediately began. The guards started rummaging through all the rooms in search of the staff of authority until they entered Asa's room. They threw her bag on the floor, emptied everything, and the staff of authority lay there. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. "Ah, I did not steal the staff of authority. I would never do that, my king." Asa immediately went on her knees, crying and begging. "Shut up your dirty smelly mouth there," the queen ordered, and Asa cried while sitting on the ground. How was she going to vindicate herself? How was she going to prove her innocence? Everything was just moving from frying pan to fire instead of getting better. Asa held the king on his legs, crying her eyes out. "My king, I swear I didn't do it. Believe me." "Can you hear yourself? I should believe someone who killed my son? Tell me, are you not capable of doing this? You didn't do this, and you expect me to believe that? Then tell me what the staff of authority was looking for in your bag. You must be stupid, the king said angrily. My king, I don't know. I don't know how that entered my bag. I really have no idea. Believe me, my king, she cried. Guards! The king called on the guards, and they immediately appeared with their knees on the ground and with a bow. Take her out of this palace and lock her up in the cell, he ordered, and the guards immediately did as they were told and forcefully dragged Asa up from where she was on the ground. She kept on crying and she was being taken away. My king, I swear, I did not do it. I did not. News already spread round the whole village like a wildfire about Asa stealing the staff of authority. She was literally on the lips of every villager of Umachi. She was cursed, gossiped, and literally mocked at. While locked up in the small cell, Asa was starved daily. She was neither given water nor food to eat. Princess Ada would always sneak to where she was locked up with a tray of food in her hand. Asa would thank her and devour the food so hungrily, like a lion. Don't worry, dear. I know you are innocent, okay? I know that you did not steal the staff of authority. I believe you. She would always tell her, and Asa would feel like at least she had that one person to lean on in this world, even when every other person refuses to believe her and abandoned her. She felt so indebted. Until one day, Princess Ada was on her way as usual, sneakily going to meet Asa in the cell with a tray of food in her hand. When she saw Asa's body lying down unconsciously on the cold floor of the cell, at first, she thought it was literally sleeping, but when she shook her several times and she never responded, Princess Ada immediately started screaming for help. Somebody help, oh! She has fainted, oh! She screamed, and immediately all the guards rushed in and lifted Asa up from the ground and rushed her into the main palace. Immediately, the royal doctor was summoned, and after performing all the necessary tests on her body, he turned to the awaited people standing before him and broke the news. She is 4 weeks pregnant, he said, and they all opened their mouth in shock. The queen turned to Asa, who was just waking up, and queried her, "Who got you pregnant?" She furiously asked. "My queen, it's obviously Ikem's baby. I have never been with any other man except for Prince Ikenga," Asa replied, already in tears. "And you expect us to believe that? You must be a joker," Princess Ola said. "You better say the truth now. Who got you pregnant?" Prince Ozo asked her. "My friend, will you open your mouth and say something? Is it until I—" the queen said, advancing towards her and trying to hit her, but the king immediately butt in. "Hey, that's okay, all of you," he ordered, and they all stopped their actions. "Inasmuch as I wouldn't want this to be my son, Ikenga's baby, we do not have any proof here. This could be Ikenga's child, and this may still not be his child. So, until the child is born, we will get to know, but for now, she will be released from the cell and brought back to the main palace, and she will continue working as a maid. The future heir of Umuachi kingdom could be inside there. Let's not do anything irrational," the king said, and walked out. The queen, Prince Ozo, and Prince Ola all looked at her angrily and walked out. After they left, Princess Ada calmly walked down to where Asa was lying down and patted her on the shoulders. "Do not worry. Everything is going to be fine, okay? I know you are not lying. It's obviously my brother's child. I mean, you don't look like that kind of a person who would just go about sleeping with different men," she said, and Asa immediately busted out crying so hard. "Thank you so much, my princess. Thank you so much for always believing in me. Thank you, she cried, and Princess immediately drew her for a hug, patting her on the back. Princess Ada slowly walked back to her room. When she entered the room, she closed the door and looked at herself in the mirror. A call came into her phone and she immediately picked up the call and smiled. "It took you this long to call me," she said. "You did really well. Well done," she told the person on the other end. "No, my princess, I wasn't the one that poisoned the prince. Oh." That day, when I wanted to go out to poison the food after she had left, my skirt got hooked with a door handle, so much that I tried getting it off. Few minutes later, when I finally arrived at the scene, that was when the prince was vomiting blood. The person on the other line explained. "Wait, you mean you were not the one that poisoned the prince? Then who did? Who wanted the prince dead as well?" she asked, and all possible ideas ran into her head, but none were really seeming possible. She sat down looking very confused than ever. Asa was back to the main palace and finally resumed her work as a maid. The king only had mercy on her by allowing her stay in the palace and work as a maid because of her yet to be predicted pregnancy. Unfortunately, that day, she was the one to clean Prince Uzo's room. First of all, she made a prayer to the gods of the land before knocking slowly on the door. When she heard a coming, she opened the door and walked into the cozy large king-size room. She saw Prince Uzo. He was sitting down on his bed shirtless. He immediately let out a grin after he saw her walking. Asa only frowned her face and started doing her job without even greeting. Prince Uzo kept on smiling and licking his lips while staring at her as he cleaned the room. Suddenly, he stood up and walked over to where she was. He ran his hands through her bald shaved head down to her shoulders with a silly grin on his face. "Wanyoma, why do you look so cute and very pretty today?" he asked, and Asa turned to look at him in anger. "My prince, please stop whatever you are trying to do right now. It's an abomination. I am your late brother's wife, and I'm even carrying his child, for crying out loud." She snapped at him, and he angrily and violently pushed her to the bed. "Who do you think you are to snap at me that way? So what if you are my late brother's wife? What if you are carrying his child? I desire you. That's all that matters. I like you," he said, and started climbing on the bed while Asa fearfully shifted backwards on the bed. "Please don't do this, my prince. Please, I beg of you," Asa cried. But Prince Uzo violently dragged her to the bed and took advantage of her. While this was going on, the door opened. Prince Uzo jumped up and started yelling at Asa. "Get out of my room! You came here to seduce me. You tried to rape me. Ah, Asa, I never knew you were like this. And I want my brother. Oh. I want him, oh, but he was so bent on marrying because of love. Now look at, trying to seduce the prince of Umachi kingdom," he said, and Asa's mouth flew in shock. "What?" she said. The queen walked into the room. "I knew it. I knew it. So this is the kind of person that you really are. You killed my son Ikenga. You stole the staff of authority. Now you tried to rape my other son. Arrow! Abomination!" she exclaimed in awe. Asa begins to cry and beg. "No, my queen. Don't believe him, please. He is lying. I would never do something like that. I did not try to rape the prince. Why would I even do something like that? Why would a woman want to rape a man? He is the one who was trying to." The queen immediately cut her short by landing her a very hot slap on the cheek. "How dare you try to accuse the prince of Umachi kingdom for such a big crime? Of course, everything is possible with you. You can do and undo the doings of the doings. You are a very big sly and you are going to face the punishment for everything you have done." She thundered and walked out while Asa continues to cry on the floor. Prince Uzo let out a wicked smile and also walked away. In Princess Ola's room, she's panting up and down in the room. "You mean you were not the one that poisoned the prince's food? Then who did?" she asked the person on the other line she was talking to on the phone. "Wait, I am not the only one that wanted the prince dead. Then who else?" she asked confusedly. "But my princess, why did you want the prince dead so much?" the person asked, and Princess Olama's face immediately changed to anger. "Because I do not like him. The day I confronted and told him not to marry Asa, he slapped me and went ahead to marry her," she said, releasing a very angry face. "But Prince Ikenga was your blood brother. At least you should have thought of some other way to deal with him other than killing him," the person said, and the princess laughed out loud and shook his head, releasing a smile. "You know what? Your job is just to follow instructions and not to interrogate me," she said angrily and hung up, then sipped through her glass of wine while looking into the mirror with a smirk. Princess Ada was sitting down in her room when a call came into her phone. "Baby girl, my princess, how are you doing?" the person asked, and Princess Ada immediately smiled. "Sure, your baby girl is cool. With everything like this girl here is fine. I've got everything under control, you know," she said, smiling and laughed. "I believe you, babe. But wait, there is something you've actually not told me. Why did you hate the prince so much that you wanted killing him so bad?" "I mean, he's your brother, right?" the person said, and Princess Ada's face immediately changed to anger. "I've always hated Ikem right from little. The fact that he was the crown prince got me really mad. I meant, why can't a woman as well become a king? This whole stupid tradition stuff just gets me so annoyed and angry. Must men only become king? Women too can also become king. That is why I plotted to kill him, but fortunately enough, someone else did the job for me, and I am so glad about that. Then that idiot called his wife that dirty pig. I actually tried to shift the blame on her. I stole the staff of authority and put it into her bag so people would have enough reason to blame her for Ikem's death." Wow, smarty. But have you ever tried to look for the one who killed the crown prince? Well, I was kind of confused and curious at first, but I don't care any longer. I mean, as long as Ikenga is gone, I do not have any problem at all. The next person I am going to eliminate is Prince Ozo. I don't just want men to be king. I want to become a king as well, she said. "But you know that sounds impossible, my princess," the caller said. "Oh, please shut the hell up if you don't know what to say. I will become the king. I must," Ada said, and angrily hung up the cell phone. She screamed and scattered everything in the room on the floor and screamed out loud in rage. Few minutes later, when she had finally calmed down, she opened the door of her room and walked out calmly. When she reached the parlor, she saw Asa crying on the floor. She rolled her eyes and started walking towards her. When she reached where she was, she immediately released a calm and gentle smile. "It's okay, dear. Stop crying. I believe you. I know that you are innocent of whatever they accused you of. Everything is going to be fine. Don't worry, okay?" she calmly said. And when Asa saw her, she immediately bursted into another round of cry. "My princess," she cried, and Princess Ada immediately pulled her for a hug, patting her on the back and soothing her to stop crying. The king called a meeting with the elders of Omachi after he had heard of the abominable act Asa is said to have committed. Asa was in the middle of the ground while the elders and the king were sitting on their golden sofas and royal cushions. My people, I called you today because another abominable act had been committed by this woman sitting before us here, the king said, pointing at her, who was crying on the ground. This woman here did not only kill my son, the late crown prince of Omuachi kingdom, she also stole the staff of authority, but also tried to seduce and rape my second son, Prince Uzo, on his bed. The king landed and all the elders began to spit out and shouting out, Aro, Tofiakwa, abomination. Ah, my king, I did not do it oh. I would never do it. Prince Uzo, why are you lying on me? Tell them the truth. You were the one who was trying to rape me, not the other way round, please, she said, trying to defend herself. But the king immediately shut her up. How dare you try to accuse the prince of Omuachi kingdom? What an effrontery. May the gods of our land strike that your filthy mouth there, the king said, and the elders immediately supported him. Who knows if the child you are carrying in your stomach is even our late prince child, since it's now so obvious that you've been sleeping all around with different men. One of the elders thundered and Asa immediately opened her mouth crying, Ah, my elders, my king, I would never do something like that. Ikem is the only man I have ever been with, she cried. Will you shut up that your smelly and dirty mouth? The queen, who has been silent all along on her seat, immediately stood up angrily. I forbid my late son's name from that your abominable mouth of yours, she thundered. Listen to me. Tomorrow is finally the day you will be swearing before the gods of our land. All your true colors will be open like an open field before the whole village. This meeting is over, the king angrily said and walked away. The elders and every other person that stood there began murmuring and spitting on the ground as they left. Asa sat on the ground crying her eyes out. Why was the world so unfair? Why was everything so unfair? Why wasn't anything working for her good? She thought as she cried. The following day, Asa opened her eyes looking gloomy and sad. She couldn't sleep all throughout the night. She was having series of nightmares and different kinds of dreams about her swearing to the gods of the land. She even saw her late husband in her dream, and he asked her not to worry, that he is always with her. It was as if those words she heard from Ikenga had built up something she couldn't explain in her. She couldn't wait for the swearing, so she could swear to whatever they would ask her to and finally prove her innocence to everyone. Sometimes she would sit down and think on everything that had happened to her. Why was everything so bad and different? Why were different hands pointing to her with different accusations? Is it just something she couldn't explain, or were they all a coincidence or what? She stood up from her position and immediately took her breath. After she was done, she walked out of her room and saw Princess Ola walking past her door. She immediately greeted her by bowing and bending her knees, but she didn't reply and just hissed and walked past her. Then she came back again. I can't wait for your swearing time so that the whole world would know the kind of person you are, she said, pointing her fingers at her, and finally walked out. Asa just shook her head and went into the bathroom, picked a rag, and started joining other maids in cleaning and dusting. While cleaning, she was told that it was her turn to clean Prince Uzo's room. Why is it always my turn every time, eh? She murmured under her breath and slowly knocked on Prince Uzo's door. Come in, he said from the room. She opened the door and walked into the room. Prince Uzo looked at her and gave out a smile. What took you so long? Or were you probably thinking about? He stopped and Asa shifted backwards in fear. Don't you even dare come close to me, Uzo, she warned, looking for what she could hold and just smash it on his head at that moment. But nothing actually came to her head at that moment. Why? Why are you shifting backward? Do you think I'm going to hurt you? I am not. I am not a bad person. Or do you want to tell the whole world that the Prince of Omoachi wants to hurt you? He asked, and Asa looked at him angrily. How could you? How could you, my prince? How could you lie against me to the people? Why are you so wicked? I am your late brother's wife, and I am pregnant. At least, if you wouldn't have compassion on me, at least show it to your late brother who is in the grave and his baby who is in my stomach. I am begging you, don't come close to me again in your life, she said, and he laughed. Oh, please, you are not even my type. And besides, I did not lie. Are you not a rapist? Didn't you try to rape me? How is that possible? How would I possibly do that? How can a woman rape a man? Doesn't that sound absurd to you? Does that even happen these days? She asked. Oh, you are throwing questions back at me, right? Anyways, that thing in your stomach is not my brother's child. I am sure of it. You are obviously a whore. That's why everyone can't help but believe me immediately. That is what we call power, he said and looked at her. Asa looked at him angrily. Uzo, you are a very wicked person, oh. You behave like a good prince, but deep down, you are a beast in human form. I pray that wherever Ike's soul is right now, he will punish you forever till you die. She cursed and Prince Uzo immediately laughed, looking at her. He stood up and started walking with a smile towards where she stood. You know one thing I like about you? Your confidence and your bravery. Even when you are suffering, it makes my heart beat more for you. If you could just say yes to me, then trust me, baby girl, all your problems will be over, he said, running his hands through her face. Don't you dare touch me, Asa said angrily, hitting his hands away from her face. She tried opening the door to run away, but he immediately grabbed her and carried her to the bed. Leave me alone! Leave me alone! She screamed on top of her lungs. Uzo laughed. If you like, scream from now till tomorrow. Nobody is gonna hear you because my room is soundproof, so no one will ever hear you scream there, he said lustfully, caressing her face, then bent down to smooch her neck. No matter how Asa continued to hit and punch him, he never relented but continued to have his way. While he was still on her, Asa saw something like a metal from afar, and at that point, the only thing that came to her mind was to do what was in her mind. She stretched her arms to grab it and she hit him with the metal and immediately ran out of the room. Ah! Ah! Prince Uzo screamed, holding his head as blood started dripping down endlessly. He walked out of the room and the palace guards immediately held him before he would fall on the ground. My prince! My prince! My prince, wake up! The voice of the palace guards made the king, the queen, and all the princesses, likewise the maids, run out of their places to the shocking and horrific scene in front of them. The prince was on the ground with blood flowing all over the floor. What happened, my prince? What happened to you, my son? The queen ran like a mad person to the scene. Her eyes flew in shock when she saw Prince Uzo lying down lifeless on the ground. What happened to my son? Who did this to my son? She cried. Call the royal ambulance immediately, the king ordered, and few minutes later, the ambulance siren could be heard from outside as they drove in. Prince Uzo was immediately carried and hurried outside to the waiting ambulance. After placing him inside, the ambulance drove away. The queen was crying and rolling on the floor. Who could have done this to my son? Who did this to my son? She cried. On the other hand, Asa was in her room, panting and walking to and fro. Her heart was drumming so hard that it could explode any moment. She was so scared. God, what have I done? What have I done? What if he dies? What if something bad happens to Prince Uzo? Ah, Asa, you are finished. You should have been more careful now. Why did you have to hit him? Oh my God. She placed her two hands on her head as she panicked and she sat on the bed. Fear gripped her so much that she couldn't even step her feet outside of her room. How will she face everyone? How will she look them in the face and explain to them that it wasn't intentional? Everything, every single thing was just moving from bad to worse. What kind of a thing is this one now? Prince Uzo, why can't you just keep your pim pim to yourself? Now, look at where it has landed you. Look at what you've done to yourself. Ah, God. She panted and stood up, then sat again. Few days later, the prince was back to his feet, and the day he returned from the hospital, the whole palace was so overjoyed. The queen was the most happiest to see him come back, though there were plasters everywhere on his forehead. He angrily walked into the palace and started searching everywhere. Where is Asa? He thundered in a very huge rage. Everyone were so surprised to see him react that way. My son, what is the problem? Why are you so angry and asking after Asa? The queen asked. Wait, don't tell me it's what I'm thinking. She stopped halfway. At that point, Asa slowly walked out from her room to the parlor. Everybody all turned to her and back to the prince. She's the one. She's the one that did this to me. She wanted to kill me because I exposed her to the village, he said, and everyone shouted in shock. No, my king, my queen, it's not what you think. It's not like that. I, I, she tried to explain, but she just couldn't find the right words to use. So, Asa, you have the right, you have the effrontery, you have the utmost right to try to kill my son. After killing my Ike, you tried to kill the other one. What wrong did I ever do to you that you had to repay me back like this? So you were sent. You came into my family to kill, to steal and to destroy. Ah! The queen lamented in shock. Asa immediately went on her knees. My king, my queen, please, it is not so. No, she cried. Because of what happened to the prince that day, I shifted your swearing day until the prince is back to his feet. And now that he's back, your swearing has been fixed again in 3 days' time. I am tired of your nonsense and evil attitude in my palace. I cannot wait to see you have a taste of your own medicine. I cannot wait for the gods to deal with you mercilessly, the king said and angrily walked away. Everyone walked out of the palace, remaining Princess Ada. Ada slowly walked down to where Asa sat on the ground and placed her hands on her shoulder. Don't worry, dear. Everything is going to be fine, okay? I believe you are innocent, so you don't have to worry about anything. The gods shall vindicate you, okay? I can't wait for your swearing day so that the truth will finally come out that you are innocent. I can't wait for that day, she said with a smile, and Asa immediately hugged her. Thank you so much, my princess. Sincerely, I really don't know what I would have done without you. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have someone like you in this palace. You are the only one that believed in my innocence. Thank you so much. Not everyone is like you, she said, and Princess Ada immediately hugged her. It's fine, it's nothing, she said, stroking her bowed hair. 3 days later, the swearing day of Asa finally arrived, and the villagers were all present outside the king's palace. No one would want to miss such an interesting and important sight. Every villagers in Umachi Kingdom wanted to witness what they've all been waiting for. They were expectant. They were negatively excited. Everybody had what they all wanted the outcome to be, and they wouldn't mind leaving their husbands, wives, and children to behold such a great sight. The king, the queen, and the princesses were all standing at the frontage of the palace. Prince Uzo stood with his hands folded on his chest. Asa was in the middle. She was dressed in a white garment. She was barefooted, and a calabash was placed on her shaved head while she knelt. Everybody waited for the chief priest until he finally arrived. An old man with a brown cloth tied from his shoulder down his knees. His 2 ears and neck were adorned with white cowries. There was a whitish circle mark drawn on his left eye with the aid of a chalk. His teeth was looking yellowish. Anytime he opened it, it shone brightly to the sight of people. He slowly walked into the center backwardly while making some serious incantations. He would sometimes look at the sky and back to the ground, making incantations and speaking in a language none of them could understand. He lifted his staff up to the sky and made some incantation, brought it back to the ground and stamped it on the ground. "My king, my queen." He turned to the king and greeted them. "You are welcome, Eye of the Gods." The king answered, and he turned almost immediately back to Asa, who was still on the ground. "Young lady, before we go on with the swearing, we are going to be asking you the same question again. Did you kill your husband or not?" The chief priest asked. "I did not kill Prince Ikem," she said. The chief priest looked at her and shook her head. "Young lady, let me remind you that you are standing before the gods of our land. Our God does not have mercy on anyone who lies before him. He is just and fair and does not pity anyone, even though you are pregnant. The wrath of the gods are very strong, like a mighty wind. Now, I will ask you the same question again. Did you kill Prince Ikenga or not?" he asked, and Asa immediately shook her head. "I did not kill my late husband, Prince Ikenga. I would never do anything like that," she confidently said, and the chief priest nodded and picked up the old-looking staff and stretched it to her. "Take this staff and repeat after me," he said, and she collected the staff. "I, put your name. If I ever had any hand in the death of the late crown prince, let the gods strike me right now. But if I did not have anything to do with it, let me go scot-free and let the culprit be punished." The chief priest said, and Asa held the staff and closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. After a while, she opened her eyes. "I, Asa, if I ever had any hand in the death of the late crown prince, let the gods strike me right now. But if I did not have anything to do with it, let me go scot-free and let the culprit be punished," she said, and dropped the staff. Everyone stood waiting for what will happen, but nothing happened. Everywhere was so quiet as the cloud was steady. The chief priest looked shocked, likewise every other person. "So she is innocent? She did not kill Prince Ikenga? So she has been innocent all along?" The villagers continued to murmur among themselves. They folded their arms and refused to believe that Asa was innocent. Some began to feel guilty for treating Asa badly in the past. "Oh, how the poor girl has suffered so much. I said it. They continued to converse and lowly talk among themselves. The king, the queen, likewise the princesses, looked shocked. But why has the culprit not been punished? One of the villagers threw the question. Are you sure that she's really innocent? Why has the culprit not been punished yet? Another one threw the question at the chief priest again. The king looked at the whole scenario confusingly and immediately turned to the chief priest for clarity as well. My chief priest, eye of the gods, please, can you tell us what is happening here? If she is truly innocent, why hasn't the gods punished the culprit yet? The king asked. The chief priest looked at everyone and carried his staff. He started making some incantations that none of them could understand. He sat down on the floor and spread the cowries on the ground. He continued to do the incantations while singing in a dialect none of them could interpret. After he was done, he stood up and turned to everyone. The gods are silent, he said, and the king looked at him confusedly. Eye of the gods, why is the gods silent? Please, can you tell us? We want to know. The chief priest made a very bitter face and looked at everyone. Everywhere is very dark. I can see darkness, only darkness. The gods have refused to say anything. There are only thick smoke everywhere, everywhere, he said. At that point, the queen immediately made an angry face from where she stood. You see, I thought as much. The gods are silent, that's why she was not punished. My people of Umachi, nobody should believe this wretched thing here on the ground. She is nothing but a big time liar. I know that there is a big mistake somewhere. The gods can never be silent. No one should listen to anything she says. She's the one that killed my son. That's all I know. She thundered from where she stood. The king tried to hold her to calm down, but she immediately shrugged her shoulders away from him. She walked up to where Asa sat on the ground and pointed her index finger at her. You, don't even try to play too much innocence here, because I know that you are the one that killed my son, Ikenga, and I am going to make sure that you are exposed so that the whole village will know who you are. She angrily said and finally stormed out of the scene. The chief priest looked at her from where he stood and started dancing and singing, making his usual incantation and leaving the palace without saying a word. The king, though still looking confused, dismissed the whole villagers and everyone went home. All the royals walked into the palace except Princess Ada, who immediately started walking slowly towards where she sat. When she reached, she squat down and placed her hand on her shoulders. I am so happy for you. At least, you weren't punished or banished at all, she said with a smile, and Asa immediately released a smile and hugged her. I am so happy as well, my princess. But why were the gods silent? She couldn't help but ask. Oh, please, don't let that one bother you. Maybe the gods are silent because of your innocence. Maybe because you are so innocent to the fact that it cannot even open its mouth to talk. She explained, and Asa immediately smiled. After she was done, Princess Ada walked back into the palace and into her room. Immediately she entered her room, her face immediately changed. But how did this happen? Yes, I know that she did not kill the prince, but I thought I went to bribe the chief priest yesterday. So how come he didn't do anything to make her guilty? She asked and sat down on her chair, looking into her mirror, confusing and angrily. In the queen's room, she was panting and endlessly walking to and fro. How? How did she go scot-free? How is she innocent? No, I don't want her to be innocent, no matter what. I don't want her to be innocent. She killed my son, and she must be punished for it. Yes, she killed my son. I can't let her just go like that. She angrily scattered her hair and pushed everything that was on the table in her room away. Asa cannot escape. No, she cannot, she said, and immediately stood up, still looking restless. That night, the queen sneaked out of the palace, but she was only able to do that by bribing the gateman and passing through the gate. She wore a long black garment, covering herself from head to toe. She walked steadily and creepily until she reached a shrine that night in the neighboring village. When she reached the old tattered looking shrine, the whole place was reeking of smell of which the gods actually adored. There was an old red decoration as the place was constructed in a square way. The chief priest sat down on the floor, making some of his unknown incantations and speaking to the gods to speak back to him. While doing that, the queen entered the sacred place and immediately started tabling her worries to him. Eye of the gods, my name is Queen Obianichu from Umachi Kingdom. I have a very big worry in my life right now. My son Ikenga, the late crown prince of Umachi Kingdom, died some weeks back and his wife killed him. But today, she was revealed to be innocent. My problem here is I do not want her to be innocent even though she is. I want her to suffer instead because I do not like her. I want her to be the one that killed my son and not anyone else, she angrily said, and the chief priest looked at her and began to make some incantation to the gods and sing to the gods. My queen, I have heard all you've said, but wouldn't you want to hear at least who killed your son? At least, shouldn't that be your first priority and nothing else? The chief priest asked her and she immediately shook her head. Eye of the gods, I do not care about who killed my son Ikenga. All I want is for Asa to be punished. One of your children killed your son, the chief priest said, cutting her in. The queen immediately looked up in surprise and back to the ground. At first, she was silent. Then she spoke up. The more reason why you should make Asa the guilty one. My children cannot face the wrath of the gods. That would be a shameful thing to the royal palace, she said, and the chief priest nodded and began to make incantations of all kind. He called Asa's name while shining his old black-looking teeth. As he hit the gong, he would call Asa's name and continue speaking to the gods and making some incantations. After he was done, he looked up at the queen. My queen, it is done. Your problems and worries are over. Go. Tomorrow morning, your results is awaiting you, he said, and the queen immediately knelt down and thanked him so much, then left the place, smiling happily. The following morning, when Asa woke up from sleep, she stood up from her bed and tried to walk out from her room. At that point, thunder immediately struck from the cloud and into the room, and she fell to the floor. The queen mother in her room, who was expectantly waiting, hearing the thunder blast so loudly, immediately ran to Asa's room. She saw Asa lying lifelessly on the floor. She quickly let out a scream. I said it! I said it, oh! The people of Umachi, I said it! She shouted as everyone immediately rushed to the scene in shock. The people in the palace let out a shocking face as they saw Asa lying on the floor with foam coming out from her mouth. Within few minutes, the news already spread like wildfire round the whole village. Every villager cursed at Asa and prayed that she would suffer forever for killing their late prince. Some even regretted ever believing her. I knew that the gods would never disappoint. He will always do justice for his people, they talked. The king was so enraged to have heard that Asa was really behind the death of Ikenga. He vowed to make her life miserable. The villagers gathered round at the palace that particular day under the very hot and scorching sun. Asa was in the middle, with severe pains. Her stomach had already popped out a little. We want her to be banished from this kingdom. Yes, we want her to be banished. She killed our crown prince. She must be banished. They kept on yelling with rage as they pointed at Asa on the ground. The king mercilessly looked at the whole scenario and finally made his judgment. My son, Prince Ikenga, the late crown prince of this kingdom, was a very nice and gentle prince who only thought of nothing but for the good of the people. He was very resilient, humble, and the best prince ever. But you chose to kill him. You chose to take him away from us. For that reason, I, the current and the reigning king of Umachi kingdom, hereby banish you from this kingdom, he declared, and the villagers supported him. Asa could only sat down crying, with no help from anyone. Her face was designed and soiled with dirt. Leave our kingdom. We don't need you any longer. You are a curse to us. Get out. They shouted in rage as they began throwing different things they could grab at her. At that moment, there was thunder and lightning, and immediately, rain started falling heavily. Asa cried as she made her way out of the village. Asa's banishment from Umwachi spread like wildfire. The villagers wore a fulfilled and satisfied look on their faces immediately they heard that Asa had been banished from the kingdom. The chief priest, after hearing such a wild news, got really upset and barged into the king's palace immediately. What have you all done? Do you know the level of calamity you have caused? My king, why didn't you summon me, the chief priest, first before making such a rash decision? He had angrily asked the moment he saw the king and everyone present at the palace. I thought that was the right thing to do. I mean, she killed our late prince. There was a confirmation this morning when the thunder struck. She needed to be banished so that Umuachi will not have any stain and so that a curse would not come upon us. The king explained, and the chief priest looked at them all and shook his head pitifully at them. Well, a curse have already come upon you all. What? They all exclaimed. How? How is that possible, eye of the gods? What did we do wrong? The king asked, and the chief priest only looked at everyone, shook his head once again, and walked out of the palace in silence. After Asa was banished from Umachi kingdom, the land became calm again, in fact calmer than before. Some began to say that it was Asa's presence in the village that made everywhere heavy and disorganized, with no peace. But now that she was gone, they were more fulfilled and happy as they moved on with their lifestyle like nothing had happened. One day, the queen called all her children to a sacred place for a brief meeting. They all wondered why their mother would call them out like that. It's something she had never done before, even when they were very little. She had never for once asked them out for any sacred meeting. Then why now? They all wondered. That night, they all assembled in a sacred place inside the palace. Which of you killed my son? She instantly threw the question at them immediately they had arrived. Which of you killed Ikenga, your brother? She asked again, but all they could do was to keep quiet and just look at her. Didn't you hear me? I said, which of you killed my son Ikenga, your brother? She shouted, already angry with tears rolling down from her eyes. It's not me, oh, Princess Ada said. It's not me either, Princess Ola said. The queen turned to Prince Uzo, waiting for his own reply, but all he could do was to keep quiet and only look at them. I killed him, he finally said with no remorse written on his face. What? The queen exclaimed, unbelievably. You killed your own brother? How? How could you, Uzo? That was your brother, for God's sake. The queen thundered with so much anger written on her face. Who cares? I needed to be king, okay? And besides, Ikenga and I have never been on the same page ever since we were born. And remember, you were the one that told us we should always try with all we can to eliminate anything that tries to stand on our way. So I took their advice seriously and I did as I was told by you. He explained, and the queen only looked at him unbelievably. Why are you so foolish? I said that when you all were small, and besides, I wasn't referring to family. I meant outsiders. Outsiders, not for you to eliminate family members, she said and sat down, tapping her foot on the ground. Do you know the level and the length I had to go through in order to clean up the whole mess you've caused? She asked, but Prince Uzo only looked at her, still with no remorse written on his face. I still don't feel any sympathy for killing Ike. He needed to die so I can ascend the throne. He was never my family. I never took him as one, so don't call him that, he said angrily and walked out. The queen kept on looking at him as his figure disappeared unbelievably. When Princess Ada went back to her room, she sat down before her mirror and stared at herself. So Uzo killed Ikenga, she said, wearing an unbelievable look on her face. Wow! She gradually let out a smile. So he too wants to be king, she said, and immediately let out a laugh. Well, I'm sorry, dear. I think you are going to join your brother in the grave. I am the only one who can become king. Why must it always be male alone to become king? I must also be king, she said as she brought out a bottle containing some poisonous substance and smiled at it. The following morning, maids woke up as early as they would and began to do their chores. When it was 8 a.m., one of the maids served Prince Uzo's food on the dining table and went to call him in his room. Immediately she left. A secret door creaked open and Princess Ada slowly and steadily tiptoed out of her room. She made her way to where the food was, opened it, brought out the bottled substance from her dress and emptied it into the food. After eating this food, you will die, Uzo. I am the only one who can become king. No one else. Go and join your brother in the grave, she said and immediately ran out of the place back to her room. When she got into her room, she danced happily and fell on her bed looking fulfilled. On the other hand, Prince Uzo finally came out of his room looking energized to eat. He sat down, washed his hand, opened the food and started eating happily. He nodded his head happily as he consumed the sumptuous meal he was having. While eating, he started feeling uncomfortable somewhere around his stomach. He would gulp the glass of water that was there and continued eating, ignoring it. At a point, the uncomfortability converted to a severe pain that he couldn't endure any longer. Ah! He screamed. He immediately let out a scream holding his stomach. My stomach! He screamed again. The pain was so severe that all over his stomach were aching really bad. It felt as if his whole intestine wanted to come out at that point. He suddenly fell to the ground. He screamed out so loud again. That was when everyone heard his voice and they all immediately ran to the scene. Before then, he was already vomiting blood. Ah! The queen and the king screamed in fright looking at the horrible scene in front of them. Princess Olama and Princess Ada also ran out of their room and were also looking shocked as well. What happened to my son? Uzo, wake up! The queen called, already crying and shaking his body for him to wake up. Quickly, guards! Call the royal ambulance! The king immediately ordered in rage. The guards did as they were told, and within few minutes, the royal ambulance arrived and Prince Uzo was immediately carried away to the hospital. Nobody could move an inch. Their heartbeat increased, thinking of the worst thing that could happen to Prince Uzo. The queen fell on the floor, crying so hard. The king panted to and fro restlessly. Oh, gods of our land, why all this torture? First, it was my first son, Ikenga, and now it's my second son, Uzo. What wrong did I do to deserve all this torture? He cried out in pain, kneeling down and looking up into the sky. At that point, some villagers ran into the palace, carrying their lifeless looking loved ones and crying so hard. My king, my only son is dead. My king, my wife was bitten by a snake today when she went to the farm. My king, my only brother was found dead on his way to the stream today. They all cried out, relying all their problems to the king at that same time. The king was so confused as he looked at all of them at the same time. He couldn't understand what was happening at that point. Gods of our land, what is happening? Nothing of this has ever happened before. Why all this now? He cried out in agony as he fell down on his knees and looked up to the sky once again with so much pain visible in his eyes. The village of Omachi was in trouble. People were getting sick every day with strange illness, and no one knew why. The sickness had taken many lives, and the villagers were very scared. The king was very worried. He knew he had to do something to save his people. One sunny morning, the king decided to call on the chief priest. The chief priest was a very wise man. He knew many things about the gods and spirits. He lived in a small hut at the edge of the village. The king set his guards to bring the chief priest to the palace. When the chief priest arrived, the king welcomed him and said, "Great chief priest, our people are dying. A strange sickness is spreading through our village. We need your help to find out why this is happening." The chief priest looked serious. He closed his eyes and began to chant softly. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes and said, "I need to see the palace. There may be answers hidden there." The king led the chief priest through the palace. They walked through many rooms until they reached the king's chamber. The chief priest stopped and looked around carefully. He suddenly pointed to a spot on the floor. "There is a blood here," the chief priest said. "The place is full of blood, stains of blood and secrets. The future heir to the throne of Umachi is suffering in a strange land. The voice of an innocent is crying to the gods for vengeance." The king was shocked. What does this mean? Asa was wrongly accused and banished. The chief priest responded, "What can we do to stop the sickness and make things right?" he asked. The chief priest thought for a moment and then said, "The gods are angry because of what had happened to Asa and her son. You must send men to find them. Only then will the gods be pleased, and the sickness will stop." As they were talking, a loud scream came from inside the palace. The king and the chief priest rushed to see what had happened. They found Princess Ada and the queen lying on the floor, struck with a strange illness. The king knelt beside them and wept. "Not my family too," he cried. "What can I do to save them?" The chief priest put his hand on the king's shoulder and said, "We must act quickly. Send men to find Asa and her son. That is the first step. The gods will take it from there." The king wiped his tears and called his guards. He told them to gather a group of strong men to search for Asa and her son. The guards hurried to follow the king's order. A few hours later, a group of men set out to find Asa and her son. They traveled through forests and crossed rivers, asking everyone they met if they had seen Asa and her son. The journey was long and hard, but the men did not give up. They knew that finding Asa and her son was the only way to save their village. Back in Umachi Kingdom, the king stayed by his family's side. The queen and Princess Ada were very sick, and the king prayed to the gods to spare their lives. He knew that the future of his village depended on finding Asa and her son. The chief priest stayed in the palace offering prayers and making sacrifices to the gods. He knew that the gods were angry and needed to be appeased. He also knew that the king's men had a difficult task ahead of them. Days turned into weeks, and the sickness continued to spread. More and more people fell ill, and the villagers grew more frightened. The king tried to stay hopeful, but it was hard. He missed his wife and daughters, who were too sick to leave their beds. One day, as the king sat by the queen's side, a messenger arrived. "Your Majesty," the messenger said, "the men have found Asa and her son. They are on their way back to the village." The king felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank the gods," he said, "we must prepare for their arrival." The next day, the men returned to Umachi with Asa and her son. Asa looked tired and worried, but she was relieved to be back in their village. Her son, little Chike, held her hand tightly. The king welcomed Asa and her son warmly. "Thank you for coming back," he said. The chief priest said that the gods are angry because of what had happened to you. "We need your help to make things right." Asa nodded. "I have heard all that has been going on in the land. I will do whatever I can to help," she said. "I want the sickness to stop, and I want our village to be safe again." After Asa and her son returned to Umachi, the chief priest announced that a special ritual must be performed to lift the curse and stop the sickness. The villagers gathered in the main square, eager to see the ritual and hopeful that it would bring an end to their sufferings. The chief priest began the ritual by calling Princess Ada forward. He looked at her with piercing eyes and said, "Princess Ada, you must confess your sins. If you do not, you will surely die." Princess Ada hesitated. She looked around at the crowd, her face pale. Finally, she spoke in a faint voice. "I killed Uzo." The villagers were in shock. "Aro," they all shouted, which means abomination in their language. The king was stunned. He could hardly believe his ears. You killed Uzo?" he asked, his voice shaking. Princess Ada continued, "I was also the one who stole the sacred staff and hid it in Asa's bag." Asa's eyes widened in disbelief. "Gods of our land," she screamed, "and you have been acting so nice to me." "You are wicked," Asa cried out, holding her son tightly. Princess Ada looked down, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to be the first female king," she admitted. Before you know it, Princess Ada suddenly screamed, saying she couldn't see anything. She collapsed, and the guards had to support her. The queen, the king, the elders, and the villagers were shocked to learn that Princess Ada was the one who killed her brother Uzo. The chief priest warned that she would stay blind until she proved herself a good person, or else she would die too. Everyone was stunned, and the guards had to hold the princess so that she doesn't fall to the ground. One of the elders stepped forward and said, "Abomination! Women don't sit on the throne of Umachi." The chief priest then began to tell the rest of the story. The queen knew that Uzo killed Ikenga and also tried to harm Asa, but she covered it up. Instead, she paid a bribe to a medicine man to forge the anger of the gods against Asa. The villagers shouted in disbelief. They could not believe that the queen and Princess Ada had done such terrible things. The chief priest continued, "The queen's action brought the wrath of the gods upon us. The sickness and death were punishment for these evil deeds." The villagers turned to Asa and her son, their faces filled with regret and sorrow. They all apologized to Asa, who forgave them freely. We must learn from this and never let such evil happen again, Asa said gently. The chief priest then carried out the ritual. He chanted prayers and made offerings to the gods, asking for their forgiveness. Slowly, the dark cloud that had hung over Umachi lifted. The sickness stopped spreading, and the people who were ill began to recover. The village returned to its peaceful ways. The king called a meeting of the elders and the villagers. We have been through a terrible time, he said, but we must now look to the future. We must make sure such things never happen again. The villagers agreed. They promised to be honest and kind, to look out for each other and to honor the gods. A few days later, in a grand ceremony, little Chike was crowned the prince of Umachi. The villagers cheered and celebrated. They knew that Chike would grow up to be a good and just leader. The queen and Princess Ada were filled with regret for their actions. They did everything they could to show that they were sorry and they had changed. They helped the villagers, worked very hard to make things right, and prayed for forgiveness. In time, the village of Omache found peace and happiness again. The people learned to trust each other and to live in harmony. They knew that as long as they stayed true to their values, the gods would protect them. And so, Omachi became a place where kindness and honesty were cherished, and where the lesson of the past ensured a bright future for everyone. The most important lesson in this story is the power of truth and forgiveness in healing a community. The tale illustrates how deceit and wrongdoing can lead to suffering and chaos, but confession and repentance can pave the way for redemption. It shows that even the gravest mistakes can be forgiven and peace can be restored when people take responsibility for their actions, seek forgiveness, and commit to making amends. Ultimately, it emphasizes the values of honesty, justice, and unity in building a harmonious and thriving community. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.